This is a D6 Generation Pip. Bite-sized content for a busy gamer. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ.
Hey, what about me?
Oh yeah, and sometimes featuring Rafe, Hollywood Granger.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the D6 Generation, a Pip. This is a very special Pip because it's introducing a member of the D6 plus 1 generation. My youngest daughter, Kit. How you doing, Kit?
Good, I'm doing really good. Last time you invited me on here was to talk about My Little Pony when I was about 12, so it's a little bit different today.
It is a little different. Kit is on her way to college this fall. You excited about that, Kit?
Yeah, a month away.
A month away. It's kind of exciting. She's been basically stuck in the house since COVID on and off, doing remote learning and whatnot, so kind of excited to get out into the real world. So
I lose access to all these great board games, though, as soon as I leave. So
yeah, we are sitting next to the wall of board games, which is pretty exciting. So Kit and I have been playing games a long time, obviously, as many longtime listeners will know. But lately, we've been playing a lot of games together, Kit, with your oldest sister out of the house and just kind of hanging out together.
All the two-player games that I love to play, and they make less of those, I feel like. So it's so hard to find good ones for two people.
Yeah, well, part of the problem is for my collection, I kept collecting miniature games, which are great two-player games. Kit's not a huge miniature game fan, but she loves board games, and so I've been sort of questing for good two-player games, which sort of leads us to Cloudspire, Kit. And we've been kind of going through, we played some great, and I think maybe in the future we'll do a mulling mechanics on asymmetric games, which basically a fancy way of saying the sides don't work the same, right?
Yeah.
We tried a bunch of these lately. Stronghold was a big favorite, the classic Stronghold. One side's playing the attackers of a castle, the other side's playing a defender. We really got into Root. I mean, Root's
great. The pieces are so pretty. I love the little wooden strips.
We'll talk more about
so
Root.
Cute.
Root is total as asymmetric as it gets, probably, and also looks really cute and plays fun. But the latest game, the latest hotness, is actually a game called Cloudspire, which I've been eyeing. I saw it at Gen Con this past fall, Gen Con 21, and then I was like, "Whoa, it looks really cool." And it's by a company called Chip Theory Games, and their big thing is poker chips in their games. And so Cloudspire has tons of poker chips in it, which means the box is extremely heavy. So I was like, this is too heavy to travel on the plane with. So I decided, nah, I won't get it yet, although I looked at it. And then I saw it again when Kit and I went to PAX East. It was sitting there, and I'm like, oh, this looks really cool, but I'm not so sure, and I have to carry it around the con, and it's super heavy. But then I went to a brand new game store that just opened up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Mad Hat Games is fantastic, and there they had a copy of Chip Theory of Cloudspire, and I was like, oh my god, here it is. And it's a new game store, wanted to support them, plus they're having a 10% opening day sale, so that's really cool. So I grabbed the copy of the box, and here we are, Kit.
Yeah. He sent me a text when he got it, and he's like, look, I bought the 30-pound game that I couldn't fit in my luggage. And I'm like, oh, Lord, what did he buy?
What have we done? Now, Kit, what was your first thoughts when we got this thing home? So and it's a big box. It's like very, very sort of square and tall. And what did you think when we got it home and opened it up and you started looking at all the components? What did you think?
I thought it was scary. You buy a lot of games where it's like, oh, it'll be 2 hours, and then we sit down and it's like an entire Saturday. It's been like 6 hours trying to figure out this game. We're not even halfway through. So I was a little bit nervous. But I was like, oh, it's going to be more difficult than Root, which I really liked. But then I found out it's like not as scary as it looks. It looks really intimidating, and it was surprisingly simple.
Yeah, it was a little intimidating. But what drew me into it was, let's talk about the components and the art, though. So first thing that kind of blows you away when you open this up and you don't even get a chance to absorb the rules or how it works, is that you open the box up. What kind of sound does a box make when it opens, Kit? Kind of like, there you go. Yeah, very good.
Or you slam it down on the table and the poker chips just...
Yeah, it's more like a thump and a little shake. Everything inside of it is well packaged, and there's really great box control. So there's like a little plastic insert that holds the pieces that form the board. Now, the first thing you notice is that the pieces that form the board are actually made out of neoprene, right? The stuff to make mouse pads.
Which felt really fancy. I think other games do that too. That was like the first time I felt like I saw one that I was like, oh my god, these pieces look really cool. And they're like, I can't break them, which is great, because he always yells at me for almost destroying his board mats. So,
Well, you want to take care of your games, Kit. It's important to have good game care.
Yeah, but like, I can't always use a coaster. Sometimes the drink gets on there. I don't know what to tell you.
See, the challenges of game ownership. But what's cool about this game is the board, it ends up being a set of interlocking what they call hexagonal islands, right? So these islands of they're hex-shaped islands made up of little hexagons that connect together, right? And these things interlock. But one side is this beautiful art of the island, sort of a top-down view of all these cool terrain, forests and lakes and paths and fields, all interconnecting. And what you do as you build the board, you have a centerpiece like this, and you interlock all the other neoprene mats together. But then what's really cool is each of the factions in the game, and in the core set you get 4 factions, has a neoprene sort of base, fort, if you will, that sort of attaches to the side of this mat, right, Kit?
Yeah, and they're all the same size, but the artwork is completely different. And when we first play these, we normally just pick purely based on, like, because we don't know the mechanics. We're just picking on how they look. And I was like, oh my god, they all look so cool. I don't know how to pick with all the pretty art and all the pretty characters. Like, how do you decide? It's all so nicely done. It's really well made.
It really is very pretty. And then so we should say, too, sort of the theme of this game, sort of the idea is that in the world of Cloudspire, there's these floating islands of land, not unlike Pandora Avatar, sort of these whole floating things. And on one of these floating islands, factions are battling it out for supremacy, right? And there's different factions in the game. And the high-level sort of sales pitch in this game, in addition to the amazing components, which is, I mentioned, the board's all neoprene. The other part of the components that are really cool, all your units, all your air quotes models, all the things you move around on the board and build and deploy and do battle with are poker chips. Really high quality, like weighted, really the nicest poker chips you've seen, but with some amazing artwork screened right on them. Kit, what did you think when you first started seeing those poker chips?
I really liked them. I think before we compared it to High Heavens, because they have, like, you have your model and that one, and they clip on the little pieces underneath. It's like that. It all stacks, but there's no model. There's just really pretty art on the tiles, and that just builds up like that. So I thought it was really nice. At first I was like, well, maybe it's not as fancy as miniatures. And I don't even like miniatures. Like, I don't like painting them. But then it ends up being really convenient, and besides the box being really heavy, it works really well, and it never gets messy. It's super easy to clean up, honestly.
It makes storage and setup very easy. It also makes the icons themselves, the art they have plenty of room on the chips for nice art. They have plenty of space on the chips also for the iconography you need to understand the basic mechanics of each chip. And then there's a few keywords on the bottom of each chip that you can reference the quick reference sheet to understand what kind of abilities and powers that particular unit has. But to Kit's point, one of the other games we've talked about on the show before is High Heavens, and what's cool about High Heavens is your more powerful units have more chips under them, so they get taller. And this game is similar because when you deploy a model, you also have a big box of poker chips that are health chips, and depending on the amount of hit points basically a model has, you put that many health chips under it. So by glancing at the board, you kind of know how tough it is to beat a guy, right?
Yeah, and then you have those huge stacks, and it's just satisfying to slam that down on the table and be like, look what's coming at you. Can you beat that? And he normally can. But that's besides the point. I try really hard.
I feel like you win more often than I do, Kit. But yes, so you have these amazing poker chips. They're all color-coded by faction. So the bird faction, the airs, are light blue. You have sort of the human faction. They're sort of this brown color. They're sort of human ogres.
They're called Brahmin, which I really think is just a fancy name for humans, or like barbarians, I guess.
Yeah, they're humans, but they also have like giant ogres and stuff. We have the sheets here. Kit's going to go look at them. Yeah, Kit's going to go check it out. So there's 4 factions in the box. You got the airs, which are basically bird people, and their shtick is they have a lot of flying. So you need to have some good air defense to sort of slow that down, mess them up. You then have the Brahmin, who are basically the human faction, but they have a couple of big sort of ogre types in there. So it's sort of, they're right here. So they're sort of like, they're sort of like humans meet ogres. They also have a lot of, or maybe even giants, although they're not quite that big. And then who else do you have, Kid? Who's the other 2 factions in the starter box?
The airs are in the starter box, which are the birds, and I played those guys first, and I thought I was really good at the game, and then I actually just realized I was playing the birds, and they're really easy to get a hang of. But I like them a lot. They have flying, basically, and that makes it really hard for other units to attack them. And then, what's the last one? I forget their name. They make me think of Avatar. That's not what it is.
Oh, yeah, they're not Avatar, but they're blue people, and they're really good at... Well, there's 2 more. There's the Grove Tenders.
Yes,
right. So we talked about the Brahmin, who are the humans, the airs, which are the birds. The Grove Tenders are sort of like the druid nature types. They're sort of like plant-based. All their art looks like either a plant or something that evolved out of a plant. So they have little raccoon-type creatures or stags and things like that in their army, but they all look like they're made out of vines and plants. The artwork's very evocative. And it's the kind of game, the more you play it, the more you kind of get sucked into the world,
Yeah, I love the Grove Tenders. They were really fun. It took me a couple rounds to get used to playing them, but they're really satisfying. You just turtle. It's really cute.
And then the 4th faction in the box is the Narora. Am I pronouncing that right, Kit?
It's better than I could do, so sure.
Okay, it's Narora. They look for all the world like the Na'vi in Avatar, right?
That's really all I think of.
They're very blue, but they're also very magical. So in other words, like a lot of their art, their hands aren't connected to their bodies except for like little magical blue lightning type energies, things like that. And these guys really live on the source. So the theme of the game is you're on this floating island, you're fighting it out for supremacy, trying to basically take out your opponent's fort, essentially. But your primary resource is this thing called Source, which is this sort of blue glowy energy that's all over the land, and you're trying to collect it. Every time you defeat an enemy unit, you get some Source for doing that. There are Source wells in the game that you can use to harvest Source. Different factions are better at worst in leveraging Source. And yeah, so they're all very evocative. As Kit's mentioned, you kind of get sucked into all of them. I started off right away playing the humans. The Brahmin had a little trouble. Kit got right... But I loved it. I just was like, oh, I'm having a hard time getting my synergies together, and kick it right into the birds, and had a great time to start with it. But let's talk about how you mentioned earlier when we first started opening the game, it seemed very intimidating. We'll talk more about gameplay in a minute. It seemed very intimidating, but as we started to set it up, it got less scary. Like what removed the intimidation and started setting things up?
It's really well made. And I know that there was a Kickstarter version before and people had like issues with the rules or whatever, but this is the only version of the game that I've seen. And basically you just have your sheet for your team, and that's going to have any special rules that are unique to you. And that's probably something that if you're playing for the first time, show that to whoever you're playing against. Otherwise there will be special rules that they don't know how they work. We were testing out a pirate team last night, and I didn't realize how some of the terms worked, and I ended up losing very badly, and it was confusing. So make sure you see those special cards and look at those rules. And then besides that, there is an overall reference card with everything you'll find on the map. So really it's like there's 2 sets of special rules for whoever you're playing, assuming you're playing 1v1. And then you have the extra card with any of the base rules for any of the tokens you'll find on the map. And that's it. And all the reference stuff is right on the tokens, and then there's the one reference sheet you have. And then all the rule books have the turn order for everything right on the back. So you just go through step by step, tells you exactly what to do. You have the references for all the special abilities, and it's super easy to flip through the rule book if it's like, oh, I forget how this exact stage works. So it's like, because it's so well made, it's not as big of a struggle, even though there is a lot of rules.
Yeah. And you know, Kit, you made the good point that there was originally a Kickstarter version, and then quickly after Kickstarter, they came out with version 2. Now, if you see this game on the store shelf, you're probably looking at version 2. You might want to double check. Version 2 is the only copy we've had a chance to really work with, and I have to say, we were very impressed with how the rules were organized. It does have sort of the classic... it comes with 2 rule books in the game. Actually, comes with a bunch of books in the game. We should say the game is actually designed for 1 to 4 players. So you can have 4 factions duking it out. You can play 2-player heads up, the way Kit and I have been playing. You can also play, there's a bunch of co-op scenarios, so there's additional books in the box I was telling you about. There's all these spiral books with a bunch of cool stories, as well as scenarios that you can play co-op against or solo against. So you can play 1 to 4. But Kit and I have been playing competitive because that's our favorite sort of way to play 2-player games. And what's nice is because each of these 2 one's a rule book and one's a rules reference, the rule book walks you through step by step how to play, how to set up. It even suggests the 2 factions to starting with, and it sort of walks you through everything you can do, so you can get ramped up very quick. And that's kind of what we did. Though we sort of cheated. We played with different factions, just kind of figured it out.
Yeah, I played with the birds the first round, which is probably a mistake.
And then there's also the rules reference, which is organized alphabetically and is designed for those quick rule lookups, which also helps a lot. But as Kit mentioned, most of everything you need once you get past the basic rules is right there on your factions reference card. And then there's one additional reference card that if you only have the base game, you will share, which has all the keywords for all the mercenary tiles that you will also get. So let's talk a little about setting the game up and gameplay itself. So we didn't really mention the objective of the game. It was to wipe each other out. But what does the game feel like? It's called sort of a cross between, it's like MOBA and tower defense brought together. Would you say that's a fair description, Kit? How would you sort of describe this game to somebody who'd never seen it before?
I think it's fair. I would say tower defense, and then it's just like PvP. Like you're duking it out with somebody. And it doesn't matter how many players you are, unless you're doing the single player mode, which I don't really like single player games, so I wouldn't try that. It really just feels like tower defense. And some of the teams rely more on like their spires, which are basically towers that you set up on the board, more than other teams, and they have different access to like the different strategies for each team. But everybody has access to a basic set of spires that they use as towers to defend their base. And really, like, that's the core focus. You set up your towers, you come up with your little army that you set at the other person, and you hopefully make it through their spires and attack their base before they kill yours. So
exactly, and you're really working with your poker chips are forming essentially 3 different types of things on the tabletop, right? And one of those things is a spire, as Kit mentioned. Those are basically your towers, and those are the things that will shoot the enemy. Those can only be built on certain spots of the map, though, and you have to go clear them of sort of NPC problems, or they call landmark tokens, before you can go get them. Then you have the bulk of your army, which is your minions. These are guys that are all going to, you have limited control over your minions. In other words, once you choose which minions to build and send on their way, they're going to follow the paths. You have a little bit of control, but basically they're going to wander straight towards the enemy, kind of like in a MOBA, and just go attack them. But then you also have heroes you can build, and those heroes you have complete tactical control over. You can move them any way you want. You can choose them to not attack. You can choose them to run off and go exploring the land. So they give you a lot of flexibility as well. And so as you play this game, you're going to decide how to balance building using resources to build spires, how many minions you want to send at your opponent, if you want to build heroes and how you want to build those heroes, and overall strategy. Are you going to sort of turtle, as Kit talked about earlier? You're going to defend your base, or are you going to go all offense and try to hit your opponent's base and kill them early, or try to balance it out? And there are sort of two ways you can win the game. And I think initially we were focused on the kill the base sort of way to do it.
You were focused on
and then only later did we figure out, well, there's this other way. So there's really two victory conditions. The game is going to take place over 4 what they call waves, which are basically large rounds of the game.
Make it longer too, right? Can't you add more waves?
You can. There's options to play additional waves or shorten it up.
We've never done that.
But the default version is 4 waves, right? Now, at the end of 4 waves, the goal is to try to wipe the enemy's base out. All bases start with 10 health at the beginning of the game. Some of the bases can heal, some of them can't. And if you get the base health to 0, which basically means getting your dudes to their base and whacking on their walls as much as you can, if you can do that, you win before wave 4. If you don't kill the enemy base, though, before wave 4, then you just compare the power of the enemy bases to each other, right? And the power is equal to the remaining health plus all the upgrades you did in the base. Yes. So there's certainly one option of turtling, which is basically I'm going to try to defend against you. I'm going to get more upgrades than you're going to get, and I'm going to try to take less damage than you're going to take. And by the end of the game, my theory is I'm going to be healthier than you are with more power, right?
Yeah, and that works most of the time, but it's also important because different factions, their upgrade costs are different. So for some of the factions, it's really easy to be like, I'll just turtle it in the corner and just spam the upgrades and I'll have way more than them. But some of them, it's so expensive for the upgrades that you can't do that. Your opponent will definitely get more than you. So you have to do some damage to even it out or kill them if possible. So it really depends on who you're playing if you can do that or not.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one thing I like about this game, too, is it feels like setup and teardown is pretty easy compared to games of this size and complexity with this faction, with many different types of units, with so many different play options. So, for example, to set things up, all you're going to do is you're going to look at that stack of those cool neoprene tiles. You're going to find the one that's the official center tile, put that in the middle of the board, and then you're going to shuffle the rest of them. Sort of tricky to shuffle neoprene, but you shuffle the rest of them, put them face down around the center tile. And then each player is going to pick their faction, and they're just going to grab each of the factions basically as one stack of poker chips for all their dudes. And those poker chips, that's all you need to play your faction. That and usually 2 or 3 matching D6 dice that go with your base.
Yeah.
And those dice are used in some situations to upgrade certain parts of your base or track different elements of your base. And that's kind of pretty much it for setting up your faction. The only other thing you have to do is set up a mercenary pile. And there's basically a set of black chips with a certain color on the back, a symbol on the back. Those go to become the market. So you're also going to be able to hire basically mercenaries to join your forces. And then in addition to that, there's a little stack of very small triangular neoprene Earthscapes. And these are little different types of terrain that are also going to be in the market that you can actually buy and deploy onto the table to basically change the terrain types of the table to hopefully your advantage as you play the game as well, which is a pretty interesting mechanic also. And then last but not least, there are 2 decks of cards. One deck of cards are events,
like the card.
And another deck of cards are relics. We'll talk more about those in a second, but to set the game, you just shuffle those. Once you've done all that, basically throw those 6 pieces of neoprene in the middle of the table, plus the centerpiece, grab your faction bits. You're almost ready to start playing. The last thing you really do for setup is you roll a d6 to figure out who's going to be player 1. And then the second player flips over one of the neoprene mats and attaches his fortress to it. So the front of your fortress, which I mentioned was also neoprene, is shaped in such a way that it can lock into 3 of the hexes on the edge of the board, right? And you have to attach it in such a way that it at least touches one of the paths. And when you're flipping the neoprene tiles over, you have to make sure that the path that's exposed, and all these tiles have paths on them, also connects to the path in the center. So basically, while you're doing this, there's always going to be a path between your fort and the center, and then the center to your opponent's fort. And if there were 4 players playing, there would be connections to everybody's forts, right?
Yeah.
And then you would do the same thing, right? Flip yours over, and plug it in, and then we'd flip the rest of the tiles over. We're ready to start.
I mean, in the first time you do it, it's kind of like, oh, I don't really see like how this matters. I'm just going to flip them, I'll connect my fortress and just kind of wing it. But now whenever I do it, it's pretty strategic, because if you don't do it right, you can accidentally make multiple paths to your fortress, so there can be multiple ways that your enemy can get to you. You have to be kind of careful and make sure, like, oh, if I flip this one first, that way they can't connect this here. It's only like 6 pieces, but that dictates the rest of the game, so it really matters how that's set up. It took me a while to realize that.
It does. And the other thing that's interesting, and I've made this mistake a couple times too, most of the forts, not all of them, especially some of the expansions, allow you to build 2 spires directly in your fortress. And when you're attaching your fortress to the land, there can be ways you attach it. So one of your spires has range to the enemy, but it becomes very hard for the enemy to get base to base with it while they're attacking your fort. So it kind of makes a semi-safe spire that just shoots at the bad guys all the time. So there are some pretty interesting choices here when you're attaching this. So even keep an eye out for that in the very beginning of the game. But what do you think about setup? Pretty easy, right? It's pretty fast.
Yes, the only setup thing you didn't really mention that I think is important is he mentioned earlier that there is the different types for each team. You have your minions, your heroes, and your spires. And the only way to tell the difference until you know is around the little poker chip. There's this little color. The heroes are gold, the minions are like bronze, and the spires are silver. The bronze and the gold are really, really similar. And I keep having to check and make sure, oh gosh, is this a hero? Is this a minion? And every so often I'll send somebody out and he'll ask me like, is that a hero? I can't quite tell. So it's difficult until you just happen to remember like who's who, because all the art's different. But the gold and the bronze are really, really similar, so it's kind of difficult to set that up. You have to keep checking the reference sheet. But besides that, it's really easy to set up.
Yeah, it's a good point, Kit. And one of the things we didn't mention is this game is, the components are so cool. In the box, there's also a little rack for holding your chips, all your different chips in a little nice, neat methodology so you can see them all. So you can, and there's actually 3 slots for your 3 heroes in the front, and there's sort of spaces for your minions in the middle. So you can organize your whole army in front of you so you can quickly and easily see it. And so to Kit's point, double check who your heroes are and make sure you put them in the front so you can easily spot your heroes.
Yeah, there's one of the teams that's like from the expansion that relies on the market to get some of their heroes, and I was like, oh gosh, I bought too many heroes because I thought they were minions and they're different colors and I can't tell. So
yeah, it is tricky. I kind of wish, that's really the one graphic design error in this game, that the gold and the bronze are so close together. I wish they'd pick like red and blue or something.
Or maybe I'm just colorblind.
Yeah, it could be that. Me too, though, so there you go. It's my fault. You inherited that from me. All right, so we're all set up. We've got our little rack with all of our dudes in it. Our fortresses are attached. Now, there's one other cool thing we didn't mention if I haven't used it yet, but there's also this cool little plastic cube that the top unscrews from. It has a ton of these little blue pegs. And so what's going to happen throughout the course of the game is you're going to be able to upgrade your fort. And your fortress neoprene mat, in addition to having all these cool art on it that shows the different zones of your fort, there's little peg holes. And so as you upgrade elements of your fort, you're going to stick these little blue pegs in there to remind you what you've built up. And then your quick reference cards tells you what happens if you've upgraded a particular spot in your fort, what that does for you. So keep those little pegs handy at the beginning as well. But you're ready to play. So let's walk through the phase order here, Kit. So the very first phase is the event card phase.
I don't like that phase.
How do you feel about event cards, Kit?
I don't like them. So you don't have to use them in like the first phase, the first one you go through, the first one you don't use them. And then every round afterwards, at the start, you reveal an event card. And they're completely random for what they do. One of them summons a giant dragon that then goes and terrorizes your opponent at random. Pretty much you pick somebody at the table. There's other ones that destroy your spires, so you lose your defensive stuff. There's other ones where you have to pay source or you can't access certain minions for that round to send out against your opponent. But it's very random, and I found that the consequences were so large, I didn't like it. I asked if we could take it out and not use it because I found it to be a little bit too much. I felt like the strategy against my opponent was lacking because instead I was just trying to deal with these crazy events that were often very one-sided. He almost died to a giant dragon that attacked him.
Did.
And I felt like that was just ridiculous because like I don't want to win because a random dragon came up and killed him. That's not fair. So I didn't like them. He likes it because you can choose, you have randomness. It adds a little bit of variability.
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. I'm with you actually, Kit. So like, but I do see why they're there, but I don't love them either. So one thing we forgot to mention in setup is after you get all the neoprene flipped up and the whole world's exposed, you're going to notice that certain hexes have these little glowy blue dots on them, right? Those are the source wells.
Source wells.
And we have to go ahead and grab these. There's another set of chips in the game that they're all white and they're called landmark chips. And you got to shuffle the landmark chips up and put one face down on each of these source wells. So there's already a random element in the game, right? Because you don't know what's going to be in these landmark chips.
I really like that, and I've had some of those where they've screwed me up before, and I still like those because they're random. But they don't feel like they absolutely destroy you. Some of the
and you can avoid them. You can decide not to look at that one.
Not to.
So it's your own sort of destiny whether you mess with them or not, and it gives it sort of that little feel of what I call a 4X game, that little explore element to it, which is nice. But I agree with you. The event cards are very random, and I've seen a lot of folks choose not to play with them, which is kind of where we are at the moment. It does give you some replayability, which could be fun. A lot of folks also will look, each player can pick one event card they hate to take out of the deck.
I take out that stupid dragon.
That's probably the thing to do. We did just get one of the expansions that adds more event cards. I haven't looked at how
more reasonable.
Those seem more balanced and interesting. So it might be one of those things you call the deck. But for now, we're going to skip the event phase. Your mileage may vary, but it's there. It doesn't cost you anything to have it. So there you go. So after the event phase, which may or may not have happened, we then go to the income phase, where you're going to gain your primary resource in the game, which is your source. Now, what's interesting about your base also we didn't mention is in your fortress, there are these 2 parts of the neoprene that are circles that are cut out and they're giant holes. There's additional poker chips. One is a blue one with a bunch of numbers on it that you stick in your source bank meter spot.
That's your source meter.
Yeah, and then there's a red one. It looks like health. And you put that in the health spot on your fortress. Yeah. You set the health one to 10 at the beginning of the game, so that's how much wounds your fortress has. But the source one starts at 0. But in the very first round, everybody gains 5 source. So you're going to go ahead and set that little blue dial to 5 in your fortress, right?
Yeah, and it's really nice because on the back where there's the turn order, there's also at the very top of the page a little thing that tells you for wave 1, you get 5 source. Wave 2, you get 7, and then it's 9, and then it's 11, I think.
Right, exactly.
So it gives you, it's right there. You can't forget it. It's right there.
You can't forget it at all. And I've often criticized games that don't tell you how many your starting hand size or anything else. I got to say, the quick reference stuff on the back of these books, and it's on both books, so you can hand one to your opponent. Very easy to keep track of. So yeah, as Kit mentioned, each of these giant, I shouldn't say rounds because there's something else in the game is called rounds.
Waves.
Each wave, and there's going to be 4 of them as you mentioned. So you start off by cranking your source to its starting value, which is 5. Later waves will be worth more. So the game ramps up. And then we go on to the market phase. So, basically the market is very simple. There's a stack of these black tokens or chips. You flip over 3 of those. It's cool units. There could be spires, it could be heroes, it could be minions.
And equipment.
Which are things you can attach to your heroes. Like you can give your heroes these cool wings and they can fly around the board or all kinds of craziness. And also it's an opportunity to buy that terrainscape, right?
Yes, the Earthscape piece.
Earthscapes.
And certain teams can make it way cheaper for them. The Grove Tenders have special stuff moving around the board. They can make it free to buy the Earthscapes. They can take it every round and make it more expensive for opponents to buy it. I never used the Earthscape piece that much. I couldn't make it work. But it's really cool.
Yeah, and I think the market phase, I think, is still something we're optimizing because there's a bunch of upgrades in all the faction fortresses for making the market work better.
And we just don't use it.
And we don't use them at all. And how many plays have we got now, Kit? I feel like 8.
More than 8.
10? It feels like a lot. Like this might be one of the most played games. Like we've been blasted through this game since we got it. And we only got it like a month ago.
So
yeah.
I couldn't have played it.
Yeah, so we've been playing it a lot. And it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours now that we know what we're doing.
2 hours normally.
Yeah.
And that's with me looking over the rules 10 times because...
And I bring this up because the replayability is crazy. Because, like I said, we haven't even really maximized how to use the market phase yet. I think mostly because we're still learning our own factions and there's so much richness there. It's kind of like
options.
If something in the market looks obviously good, we'll grab it, but we're not really optimizing the market, right?
There's one team in the expansion called the Uprising that literally relies on the market to get their units, and we've both played that team once now. We both lost. But so we kind of were forced to use the market for them. So I'm learning it a little bit better, but I'll be honest, I still don't use it as much as probably I should or I could.
Yeah, I think the market adds a lot more depth and replayability as well. It could also probably be there to save your bacon when maybe one of your key units has been captured or wiped out. So in any case, there's the market phase where you can actually add some cool stuff to your opportunity. Now, the downside of the market is you're going to spend source to buy things from the market. And the reason this is a tough decision is that same source is going to be used to improve your bases and build spires. So usually what Kit and I find is we want to save that for base upgrades and spires, especially in the first wave. But I'm sure advanced players have figured all kinds of crafty maneuvers there. So after you buy things from the market, you're going to go on to that build phase. And here, Sir Kit, what do you think about when you go into the build phase? How does that sort of work?
Depends on the team. I normally focus on the base upgrades first because I try and win by turtling and then just having more upgrades and health than he does. So I try and focus on that. But you can also buy spires and put those on the board in certain spots. And you're only limited by the amount of source you have. It's important to remember that when you're looking at building spires, once you go on to the next phase, you have 2 build actions you can use only to build or upgrade spires. So sometimes in my when I'm actually in the build phase, I'll just spend all my source straight up on doing upgrades. And then I'll wait until the next phase and then I'll use my bonus build actions later once I get more more source from killing some stuff to actually get those spire upgrades, which is risky because then you have no defense at the start of the round. But sometimes that way you can wait and get more source before you build the things you need to build.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things, in order to build a spire in most cases, there are some factions that break this rule, but you have to put spires on top of those source wells, which are those little blue glowy
What
things.
faction breaks that rule?
The humans can build anywhere.
Oh.
Right? And I think the faction I just played too,
The pirates?
No, the
Uprising?
The Uprising put them next to their way gates.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Look at that. I forgot
So there's a
about
couple of rules like that, but mostly you have to put them on the wells. Now, as I mentioned, in the very beginning of the game, the wells are going to all be covered by landmark tokens. So in the very beginning, you can't put any there, but you still could build a spire in the first build phase because most forts have 2 open spire building spots right in the front for early defense. So to Kit's point, if you want to turtle out the bat, you can start building those right away. But again, if you're putting source into your spires, you're not putting source into your upgrades on your fortress. It's some tough decisions. Now, the spires you can build, you're going to be looking right at your chips in your little base for that. And the source cost is right there along with their abilities. So you're already going to be weighing, what do my spires do? And then you got to be reading through all the cool abilities of your base and trying to decide what you should upgrade. Kit, what are some example upgrades that you found to be really fun in some of the different factions to give people an idea?
The airs, which is the birds, they have an upgrade that I think is like 2 down. It's kind of expensive. But basically, you get to build 2 spires instantly on the 2 little slots on your fortress. And they're 2 of your cooler spires. And normally for most of the teams, you start with access to 2 spires. And there's 2 more spires you can unlock if you buy certain fortress upgrades. But with the birds, if you buy the upgrade to build those 2 spires, you build them for free right on your base. And it doesn't matter if you have that upgrade to technically access that spire or not. So it's a great way to get some defense up there against your opponents relatively cheap. And it counts as upgrade points when you're calculating it at the end because you spent your source there instead of just on directly building the towers. So I like that one a lot.
That's a great one. Another good example, the humans, their thing is most of their minions are double-sided tokens. One side is the side you normally deploy them on. The other side has got this star. To deploy them on the star side, you have to have upgraded certain things in your base. So it's sort of like, they're sort of the classic, like almost StarCraft. You upgrade your base and your units get better. They've got that thing going on, but not all of them have that. Some of them have, you have to unlock a certain part of your base to even build a certain type of unit at all. Some of them will grant you additional CP, which are the points you use to deploy models. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff you can do in your base, and you're really starting to build energies and synergies, right, as you do this. Yep.
It's very much like Root. Each group is completely different, and I think it's a little bit easier in the Root to know what your opponent's doing, but it's still very much, all their upgrades are pretty much completely different, and until you play that faction, you're not going to really know exactly what your opponent's doing.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit difficult.
Yeah, because I was playing the Pirates, which is one of the upgraded factions last night, and I had an upgraded Swabby, and it's like, wait, why is that guy on the star? I'm like, oh, I upgraded my base. What does that do? Well, when you kill him, the other unit gets to go twice,
no,
and because oh god, it's like, oh. So you get that. But that's what makes it interesting. Like the game, is there's never-ending discovery. So it's a fantastic game if you're playing a similar opponent over and over again because you both can start to learn the ins and outs of the game and really get into it. So that's the build phase, and that's sort of where a lot of your long-range game strategy is going to go in. The next is the prep phase. Now, in the prep phase, that's where you're getting together the actual models, in this case, chips, that you're going to put onto the battlefield and are going to go attack your opponent, right?
Yes, and that's based on your little combat points, which is a little yellow fist on the tile. And it starts out with the same amount of source, you get the same amount of CP. So it's 5 CP in the first round, and that's how many points your units can max out at for that round that you deploy.
Yes, and what's cool about this, too, is source and CP are the 2 resources. Source carries over, right? So when you gain source, you upgrade your dial. When you spend source, you turn the dial down. CP is like a resource you have instantly. There's no dials to track it or anything. So when it's time to do prep, you look at this little chart. It says, oh, it's wave 1, so you get 5 CP. That's it. If you don't spend it all, you lose it.
Yeah.
So you might want to optimize and spend all the CP you can, and that's going to really dictate what you can put out there. Now, each faction, I think all the factions have this, they all have one hero that costs 0 CP. Yeah, and so they can start first. Now, heroes have a bunch of restrictions. You can never deploy more than 1 hero in a given new prep phase, right?
Yeah.
So I can't, even though I might be able to afford 2 heroes, I can't put them out. And I can never have more than 2 heroes on the map at a time, right? So it's hard to get heroes out there, and that's probably a game balance thing because they're very powerful.
Yes, because they can survive between rounds. Normally, like the onslaught phase, which is when you technically fight your person, it ends once all the minions are dead. So if you have a hero that's still running around the board, they can keep surviving for multiple waves, which means in the future you could have way more guys out than the tactical CP value is for that round, which can really help you at the end if you're trying to make a final push where you don't care if anybody dies. Just send them all in.
Yeah, if you manage, then that's another tough tactical choice, right? When you got your hero on the board, do you really help him with minions fight and risk him dying dying too, or do you kind of play it safe with him and have him do a little exploring and try to keep him okay until a later round?
Because some of the teams really rely on their heroes for their special abilities, and I sacrificed a hero recently and realized that the ability that hero had was unique to that hero, and I needed it to like expand my fortress, and I realized I made a really big mistake because I personally like to sacrifice my heroes a lot of the time, but with that faction, the Uprising, it was not a wise idea.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. There's actually quite a few chips out there that are building / buffing chips that aren't really fighters themselves, and so you got to keep an eye on that. And yeah, I got the same problem because I played that faction too, the Uprising, and their main hero does one of their primary faction's abilities,
and we both let him die.
And I don't know how you keep the guy alive, because if you know what you're doing, you're gonna hunt that guy down. So it's kind of interesting. So anyway, so the prep phase, you're going to take those in wave run. It's 5 CP. You're going to take that CP. You're going to figure out what chips you want to get. You're going to get your 0-point hero. Now here, there's some interesting strategy too about how you actually deploy them. So you're going to build a single stack of all these guys that are coming in. Now you have a couple choices when you build this stack, right? Each chip that you're going to be able to deploy that you've chosen based on your CP, you're going to put the number of health chips under it equal to the chip's health. And on the chip, there's a little icon that tells you how much your health is. So for weaker units, it might be 1, 2, maybe 3.
Normally 2.
Normally 2.
1.
There's a couple of Swabbies are 1. Maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're fancy pirates. I haven't played them
the
yet.
pirate Swabbies are 1. But most of them, right? Most of them are 2s, and the really powerful guys are like 4 or 5, sometimes even 6. So you get these big stacks of chips with a hero on it. Now, what's interesting though is you can either make one big stack with each hero with their health under them, and they're sort of all separate but in a giant stack, or you can combine them, right?
You can group them.
They're called grouping, exactly. And in that case, you can actually put one chip directly under another chip, another minion under a minion, and then below that, you just put the health of the chip on the top. So it's basically like they're traveling together, and the guy on the top is screening the guy underneath, right?
And basically, the two caveats for that are heroes cannot be stacked, and the slowest guy has to be on top, which is really important to remember because I almost screwed that up a couple times in playing.
Right. So the slowest guy's got to be on top, which is fascinating. Now there are a couple units that break that rule with the transport ability.
Yeah.
So there's like some fast transports you can put slower guys
but
in,
it
but for the most part,
on there. It's a little like
which also makes sense from a fluff point
Yeah.
of view. So you're building, and so it's interesting because if you group them like Kit described, the downside is they only move as a single model, and you can't use any of the abilities of the guys under the guy on top until the guy on top dies. But if you spread them out, sure, they can both be doing things, and one might have a range attack and one might not. So now, or both might have range attacks, so you can shoot twice. But there are some factions, particularly the humans, that have splash damage that it's everybody adjacent to people. I have guys that blew up in the pirates, for example.
Yeah.
So being a single stack actually can be good too. So you have there's some interesting tactical decisions there about how you build that stack, right?
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I like it too. And in the beginning, I think we were grouping a lot, and then we weren't grouping at all, and now I think we're back to mixing it. I think we've kind of figured it out.
Yeah, it's difficult to choose.
So basically, you're going to figure out how you're going to build that stack. You're going to put it on your fortress gate. So my fortress is going to have my stack on it, and way across the table, Kit's fortress is going to have her stack on it. We're not allowed to look at each other's stack. Like, it's sort of secret. I can look at the stack itself. I can see the colors and who's on the very top.
And the number of health chips.
But you don't have to reveal. In fact, they even talk about screening it. You don't have to reveal what the tokens are in the middle, right?
Yeah, and if you have a grouped bunch of units and you start sending them out, the other player's not allowed to look underneath. They can't know what's grouped underneath the top unit, which is really scary because you don't know what's coming at you next.
You don't know, right?
You just have to know it's the same speed or faster.
Yeah, it's all you know. It could be some little dude with like 1 hit point hiding this big dude who's got like 10. You just don't know. So you've got the stack ready to go, and now it's the onslaught phase, which is the best name for a phase ever, Kit.
Yeah, it's quite cool.
So it's the onslaught phase. So during the onslaught phase, what's going to happen is the player 1 is going to move everybody in his stack. Then the opponent's spires are going to fire, right? The opponent's towers would attack during my turn. It's interesting. Your towers don't attack in your own turn. They attack in your opponent's turn. So you move your pieces, your opponent's spires fire, or all your opponent's spires fire in a 4-player game. We haven't done that yet. We came with the trailer.
I want to try that so bad. It would be so long.
Then there's an exploration phase, which basically means if any of your units or heroes are next to one of those landmarks, thank you, Kit, you can peek at it, right? So if you, the player who owns those units, can peek at it, and you can decide if you want to flip the landmark over or not. If you flip it over, oftentimes the landmarks are monsters and things, and you put the health under it. And if it's exposed, your units are going to have to attack it because they always fight if they can. The downside of that, though, is when you fight something, we'll do combat in a second, it strikes back. So there's no free lunch in this game. When you attack something, it attacks you back unless you can manage to whack and kill it.
Some of the
shot.
units don't have an attack value for the landmark minions, so you don't have to worry about that, but they do have other abilities that make it really difficult to move by them. So it's really important to choose whether or not you want to flip them over. And the scariest part is there's a couple ones with this ability called Foreboding, which means when you look at it, you have to flip it over.
Yes.
So sometimes you find something like, oh god, I don't want to touch that. It has an attack value of 3, but you have to flip it over and one of your minions attacks it and just instantly dies.
Right.
So
it's very... Now, what's interesting is the landmark tokens, we didn't mention this, they all have different backs. Some of them look like swamps. Some of them look like little buildings. And you start to learn over time that the swamp is more dangerous than other things, although there can be monsters anywhere. So you start to learn, like, okay, at least by the back thing, it's probably a little less risky to look at it. But you're right. When you look at it, you're risking something here. So be careful. And then after you explore, you attack. Combat in this game is really very simple.
there's no dice. It's so straightforward.
Well, there's dice in the towers.
Well, yeah,
spires,
but for the minions fighting each other, there's no dice.
The minions
It's
fighting
so
each other,
nice.
it's simple. Well, we'll do spires shooting in a second. Let's do spires. So we've moved our guys. Let's say we didn't have any exploration to do. Kit spires attack. Here's how it works. So under each of your spires, right, there's a number of chips. And the types of chips under the spire tells you how the spire attacks. Green chips, every green chip adds +1 range. Orange chips, every orange chip adds +1 attack die. And yellow chips are its defense, makes it harder to hit the tower, right?
Yeah.
So when you build a tower, it's got icons on it that tell you how many of these chips start. And then one of your build actions can always be add more chips to the tower, but it costs you a lot of source.
And there is a limit. You'll see those little blue dots in the spire tiles that tell you how many upgrades you can have. And certain guys can change that number of upgrades so you can make crazy towers that have like 5 or 6 upgrades and can shoot halfway across the board.
Yeah. So basically when it's my turn, I've moved my guys before they get to attack or do anything exciting. Kit spires fire. If I've got anybody in range of her spire, she's going to roll one of these spire attack dice for every orange disc in the spire tower, right?
Yes.
If they have range. And she'll roll them all, add up the results, which are all numbers on the dice. Most of the sides are a 1.
There's blanks, 1s, and 2s.
Yep. There's only 1 blank and there's 1 2. The rest are all 1s. So you got a pretty good chance of doing some damage. You got a nice chance of doing 2 points of damage. And you could get crappy luck and roll nothing.
I like the Grow Tender upgrade that makes it so all blanks count as 1 damage, so you can always hit
That
things.
does
That's
mitigate
so satisfying.
So the towers do have some randomness. However, the regular attack does not. So after your spires attack, then your guys get to attack. And so to do that, you basically one at a time, you can pick one of your units, and if it's a minion, they must attack something they can attack. You can choose which thing it is, though. If they have
there's
choices.
multiple things adjacent.
Yeah, some of them have range. Some of them can only attack adjacent. The thing to remember is when you're attacking, each of your models has an attack value. That's how much damage it's going to do the opponent. And then your opponent, though, gets 1 retaliation. And I think of it as like a reaction in D&D. You get 1 reaction around.
Yeah.
So the opponent can react to the first guy that hits him.
Yes.
And after that, it doesn't. So if you've got 2 chips fighting a dude, and that dude's the bad guy you're about trying to kill, his attack value is 3, the first guy you have that hits him is going to take 3 back.
Yeah.
And the next guy's not. So
Unless you manage to insta-kill him, in which case, obviously, they don't get retaliated.
If you can kill them in your attack, they don't get to retaliate. So if this thing's got 4 wounds and I do 2, I hit it for 2, then it hits me back for 3. Maybe it kills me, maybe it doesn't. And then we go to my next guy who can also attack and he doesn't get retaliated against, right? That's pretty much it. Spires don't retaliate. And that's pretty much... Oh, and then if you have flying, unless you've got air defense, you can't attack it.
And ranged guys can shoot guys, and unless the guy they're attacking has range, that guy doesn't get to retaliate.
Right. So all those kind of rules make sense, but they're also very clearly covered. So that's attacking. That's pretty much it. So you move all your guys. Your opponent's spires fire. You do any attacks you can. You remove any chips. And by the way, if you wipe somebody out, so if you got the last health chip off of a token, you take that thing back to your what they call your barracks, and your opponent is going to score the number of whoever killed it's going to score a source equal to the reward value on the token. Now we should say some of the landmark tokens have cool rewards. They're not always.
Sometimes you get spires. Sometimes you get relic cards, which we don't get very much. I don't know them very well.
Yeah. So the other deck of cards is relics, and the relic cards are rewards that you'll find for killing certain things in the land. But usually you're getting source for killing stuff. That's the vast majority of things, which is very powerful in the middle of the onslaught phase because as Kit mentioned earlier, during the onslaught phase, you do get to do before you move your guys a limited build option, right? Yes. And it says limited because the only thing you can do is either build a spire or upgrade a spire. And you can do that twice during an onslaught phase. And so there's actually there's little holes in your mat to mark it with pegs.
You can do both of them in the same round, but it has to be at the start of your turn before you do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you're going to want to go ahead and... So when let's say you get out there on the world and you manage to kill one of those landmark tokens that was covering up one of those great source wells, your opponent gets to go, but assuming they don't get there in time, you can then, in your next round, go ahead and build something on top of that. right? So that is the onslaught phase. And as Kit mentioned earlier, you do the onslaught phase until all the minions are dead. And once all the minions on both sides are dead, the onslaught phase ends. Now, if during the course of that phase, it gets to the point where a set of your minions or even one of your heroes gets all the way across the board to your opponent's fortress.
You have to whack the fortress gate.
When they do their attacks, they can actually attack the fortress gate. And whatever they do for damage, the fortress takes in health.
Yes.
So if I got a guy that does 2 damage on attack, Kit's fortress would take 2 health points.
And the fortress always has a base retaliation of 1. It doesn't matter how far away your guy is attacking the fortress at. It has unlimited range. And then some of the upgrades let you get to 2 retaliation, but it starts off as 1. So whatever guy is attacking the fortress, they're going to get whacked back and probably die eventually.
Some of the forts get really good at retaliating, like can do 3 damage on retaliation.
The humans shoot giant cannons.
The humans can have a cannon that can shoot at you in the wind. Yeah, it's craziness. So that's the whole goal of the onslaught phase, right? What you're trying to generally do is get enough power to build more. If you're a turtler, you're trying to build more spires to slow the enemy down or maybe kill them before we get to your fort. And of course, if you're aggressive, you're trying to get some of your guys to the enemy fort and actually do some damage to them. And I'd say it's about 50-50 in our games where we actually do damage in that first wave to the opponent's fort, right?
Yeah, it depends on who you're playing and also how much damage does, because some of the factions, which is the Greaves, which are the insects, are played once, and then the Grow Tenders have the ability to heal their fortresses. So even if you do like damage the first wave, if you're against those factions, then it doesn't mean as much because they can heal it up by the end of the game. So...
And that's pretty much the game. The last thing you do is you do the end of the wave. So you just switch who the first player is, and a whole new wave starts. So at the start of a wave again, the only change is you'd have another event phase, which you might skip if you're Kit and I. Then you go right to income phase, and the big change each wave is just the amount of source you get during your income phase, and the amount of the CP you're going to get, which is going to be 7 and 7 in wave 2, 9 and 9 in wave 3, as Kit said, and 11 and 11 in wave 4. And that's pretty much the whole game, and you're going to play this for either 4 waves, and then who has the most upgrades and health left at the end in their fort, or
if someone dies before,
maybe you killed them, right? Maybe you wiped out their fort. So, Kit, what are your sort of thoughts on the different factions in this game? So there's 4 in the box we mentioned, and then we've gotten some expansions now. We've got an expansion that adds the Greaves, which are basically bugs.
Yes.
Right? We got an expansion that adds the Uprising, and the Uprising only has 4 chips.
They're so hard.
But then they get a random draw of a bunch of dudes from the market, so they're basically market-based, and they get market guys kind of for free, so they're sort of a very random faction. And then we have what are the pirates called? I forget all of a sudden.
You played them. You should know.
I did just play the pirates. I'm going to have to look them up. But you have the pirates as well. We're just going to call them pirates. I'll look up the name in a minute.
Pirates.
But what do you think of the different factions? How do they feel? Very different? What do you like about them? What don't you like about them?
They're very different, and I've played everybody except for the pirates because we just started the expansion stuff last night. And my least favorite ones were probably the Uprising and then the Brahmin, which are the humans. I managed to win with the Brahmin. I was very proud of myself because they were really difficult. And then I got to the Uprising and I'm like, oh my god, this is so different. Like, the teams are really different, and some of them you're going to play and instinctually get. I played the Airs and I knew exactly what to do. I won 4 times in a row and I was really proud of myself. And then I'm like, it's not really because of me. It's because this faction is really geared to how I just play these games naturally, versus some of them aren't. So it's really worth trying them all because there's a lot of tiny differences, and then you start playing and realizing how much those tiny differences can really benefit you. I don't think there's any factions where it's like that faction is innately worse than the others, don't touch that one. We played Ankh before, and there's you get the different gods, and some of the gods it feels like there's no reason to ever play that one, don't do that. This game it feels like all the factions have their place and can do their thing. It's just a matter of who's playing them, because it's really easy to screw any of them up if you don't do it exactly right. So
I think that's right. Horizon's Wrath, that's the name of the pirates. I was trying to remember.
Oh, that's
so I think you're absolutely right, Kit. Each faction has a very distinct play style, but what's also interesting about them is there's no possible way to do all the upgrades on a particular faction. So even when you pick a faction, there's different play styles of the particular faction as well. And that's what makes this game so fascinating. I ended up getting all the expansions just because I knew it's sort of it's a game that's super high production values, and those games don't usually stay around a long time. And I just wanted to get all the stuff.
It's so cool.
And it's great. But you could stick with just the base game and those 4 factions and have lots and lots of replayability from both a cooperative and competitive point of view, because we even put our toe in the cooperative stuff, or just from the different ways you can and play styles of each of the 4 factions, which is also pretty fascinating. So, Kit, we have to go ahead and rate this game.
What is your rating system?
Well, we have the D6G patented rating system.
Oh my gosh.
So you're going to have to, I'm going to explain it to you, which will help our listeners.
I've never listened to an episode of your show.
No, and I don't hold it against you, but I'm a little bitter. So basically how this works is, the D6G rating system is the number you'd have to roll on a D6 to like the game. So it's basically the percent chance the average gamer would enjoy a game. So for example, if I said this is a 5+ game, meaning the average gamer would only like it on a roll of 5 or 6. But if I said it was a 2+ game, it would mean most gamers, right, on a roll of 2 or better on a D6 would really like this game. 2+ on a reroll, that's like as good as it gets pretty much, because that's like you almost can't not like this game, right? So what do you think? What would you rate this game? And then a little bit of a why.
3+.
3+. Why do you think that's a pretty good rating? What do you think?
Well, I really liked it, and I think if you give it a chance, you like it, but a lot of people are intimidated by how complicated it looks. It takes a couple rounds to get used to it, and it's really easy to be overwhelmed by the choice. So I think if you're, like, just getting into games like this, it's going to be really difficult. And I know some of your friends were like, I don't want to play this because it looks too hard. So
that is true. That's fair. Actually, I think 3+ is a really good rating. I might do 3+ for the reroll.
So I get to roll twice?
Yeah. So it means if you roll 2, you roll again. So basically that makes it a little higher odds than your choice. But I think the reason I agree with you 100%. This game checks all the boxes for me. 1, the components are crazy cool. 2, it looks good on the tabletop. It's kind of a table pig, but it doesn't look messy on the table, which I really like.
It looks pretty. We leave it on the kitchen table.
Yeah, it looks really
fine.
nice, and Nicole's never complained about it being on the table, which is sort of interesting. yeah, that's probably going to change. But what's really great about it is it also stores really easily. It all fits back in the box, including with all 3 expansions.
So it's just one like 20-pound box that you lug around, but it looks so pretty.
I think it's closer to 30 pounds because all the chips. What makes it work is all the poker chips condensed down really nicely. One thing I have done, in addition to getting all the expansions with new rules and factions, all the poker chips are the highest quality, except in the base game, the health chips are these light little plastic chips.
Which I didn't really notice until he bought the
Didn't bother Kit
thing.
but I was like, they make good health ones, Kit, that are really high quality. So I splurged and got those. I like them a lot better. I just think they look cooler. It does add probably another 10 pounds to the box, but it looks cool. But the other thing, a lot of cool graphic design going on here that's really smart. So there's the quick reference cards have everything you need for on basically 2 sheets. There's enough for everybody. And if you get all the expansions, they have quick reference cards for all the expansions that include all the rules from the base game. So basically any quick reference card from the base game or the expansion has all the rules on it. So you're not fumbling around like trying to find the right version. Have you ever gotten to rules debates very much? Not much. A couple of small
Normally
ones.
I have questions, but like once you check the rule book, it's really clear. It's not like you're going to argue with it for a minute.
So I don't know what happened in version 1. I heard a lot of crazy things about that. But version 2, I think they figured it out.
I think the most confusing rule is you have to move a minion closer.
Yes.
That's kind of vague.
You can get a little cheaty there. So when you move your minions during the onslaught phase, the rule is the minion must end closer to the enemy's fortress than it started. Right? And you have to move all your steps. But other than that, you can move a circuitous route as long as you're ending up closer, right?
Because like the birds have a lot of characters that are movement speed 4, so you can kind of move diagonally back and forth and end up only moving like 2 squares closer, even though you moved 4 steps, which is totally legal. But when we were first playing, I'm like, that's a little weird.
It's a little sneaky, but everybody can start to do it.
So
yeah, everybody kind of starts doing it. And once you get into it, and then there are other rules later that make it clear that's the intent, because there's other rules that basically, like the pirates have a thing that has to go straight as fast as it can, and it's very clear
it has to be the shortest route.
Yeah, so they do. But and that's probably, you're right. But that actually does add some nice little bit of tactics to the minions, which are otherwise kind of almost like AI driven little dudes running around on the board. So
you get to pick what they fight too, and the order they fire, which is really important.
Which is very important, exactly. So yeah, this game, I think we're going to be playing it for a lot longer to come. It's up there, one of my favorite 2-player games, and it is a 4-player game. The only thing I worry about, let me caveat my rating, Kit. So 3+ the reroll for 2-player people, because it's a fantastic 2-player game.
Fair.
The co-op modes look really good. So if you're a soloist or a colo person, I think you probably like it also.
People sound like the solo one's really, really cool. I just don't like solo games.
So I think if you're in that realm, you're going to like it too. Where I think it might not be so strong is if you're looking for a good 4-player game. I think it will be cool, but I think it will play long and maybe outstay its welcome.
I think 3 player is probably the max. There's this one mechanic that they have in only games with more than 2, where you technically choose your target, so you choose who you're going to fight that round, and who you fight every round kind of changes based on who's the first player. So I really wanted to try that, but you have to have more than 2 players for that to work. But there's so many people, the turns are going to be so long, I don't know if it would even be fun at that point. I'm with you. So I think I really want to try it with 3 players. I think it'd be really interesting.
I would also try it with 4 players if I had an entire Saturday afternoon.
I would just like warn everybody.
Everybody's got to
who's
know what's
there.
up. Yeah.
Like this Monopoly level long, just sitting there for 2 days.
Right. I mean, it may not be. And Kit and I are getting pretty fast. And if you can get the jump on somebody and ace them quick, it actually can be an hour. But what's interesting about it is every time that happens, so far Kit and I have not been like, well, that's it, I'm out, and table flip. Instead, we're like, want to play again.
I want to try again and fix that.
Let's do that again. Oh, I screwed that up right in the middle. I want to try again. And at least when you do screw up, it's mercifully quick. You kind of know.
It's really quick.
You kind of, oh no, and then you just die.
Like if you make one big mistake, it's over. At least when we're doing it,
Yeah,
we capitalize on that.
So anyway, there you have it. That is Cloudspire by Chip Theory Games. Again, one of our favorites, and I think we have to do an episode, Kit, on asymmetric gameplay, mulling mechanics.
Yay.
Yeah, all right.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.